Great to have you here
Welcome to the podcast.
with me and my guests from around the world. Welcome to the Simone Feiler podcast.
Welcome to this podcast.
Let's get into it, shall we? On the Simone Feiler podcast. Had the extreme pleasure of editing and producing the inspiring Practical Reconciliation, written and narrated by the authors, Aunty Munya and Carla Rogers, who both joined me on my podcast today. Welcome, ladies.
Hi,
Cheers.
Simone.
Cheers,
Lovely
Simone.
to be here. Thanks.
Yeah, I appreciate your time. So the audio book and, of course, printed book gives clear guidelines to strengthening relationships for all Australians in 7 easy steps, a very timely but most likely a long overdue book. So thank you for both taking the time to talk about this, work together and write this important book. Firstly, before we get into the book, I'd like to find out a little bit more about you guys. How long have you been friends and where did you meet?
So we met, was it 10 years ago?
August, it was exactly 10 years.
Mm.
And Simone, I had evolved the business for quite some time, I think since about 2005. And we had a very large project up in the Gulf of Carpentaria working with some remote Aboriginal communities, coaching them to come up with their own community safety plans. It was called the hard yarns because it was about really hard stuff like alcohol and violence and suicide. And so I needed a team of Indigenous facilitators for that because I'm not Indigenous myself. And someone raved about this woman called Aunty Munya and put forward her, and Aunty Munya came on the team and ended up replacing someone who was a bit of a last minute scratching, and then Aunty Munya became the lead, one of the leads on that team. So that's where we met.
Yes, exactly.
And then we discovered that we had a lot in common, didn't we?
Yeah, just in chatting to one another, we shared the same values and the same vision for Australia about creating a more kinder, more inclusive Australia. So we thought, so what can we do together then,
Yeah, I think one of those values was that we share a common humanity. So, values like the need to belong and to feel connected. And we strongly believe that everyone, no matter what colour, ethnicity, has wisdom to offer, don't we?
Absolutely. Everyone has something to offer. And we just thought we'd like to tap into that great resource to make Australia a better place, really.
Yeah.
Well, it's incredibly inspiring, given that an Indigenous lady and a lady of white background come together to actually implement something that can drive forward that reconciliation, basically, because obviously the powers that be haven't put a proper avenue for that in place as yet. So I think that the work that you've written here is incredibly important to move forward so that we can all feel inclusive, because I think a lot of people I talk to, we want that road where everyone feels inclusive, that we are one people now, and we need to recognise the Indigenous for the fact that this is your land, you've been here forever. And furthermore, that I would say, and the apology that Kevin Rudd gave was a small step maybe in that direction, but the way that you have described the words in Practical Reconciliation really look deeply into your tradition from dating back, 40,000 years in this country. And we don't see that. And more. And especially the comparison to the ribbon that you give in the book. It's just amazing to realise. I learned so much that I don't think that the typical Australian that listens to the news and walks around actually understands how deep this goes. So I think the work that you've written, again, is very important. But tell us a little bit about the evolved communities, Carla. How did that actually start to begin with?
Well, if we want to go way, way, way back, as a kid, so my ancestry is actually, I did, there was Nichols on the First Fleet, so it does extend back to the First Fleet. And I just felt I grew up, my first 10 years were in south of Sydney, and I just grew up wandering the bush in Sydney. And I watched Skippy was big at that time. This was in the 70s, and I just had such a connection to the bush, and I used to, without sort of knowing that's what I was doing, I used to talk to the old people. I could actually see spirits in the bush, and I'm not saying anyone needs to get that woo-woo to sort of go on
well,
this
my
journey,
skin just crawled off me.
yeah.
But yeah.
But I just had this desperate longing, Simone, to know an Aboriginal person, or like have an Aboriginal friend. So that's pretty much where it started for me. And then I had I guess I was pretty entrepreneurial at that time, so I set up, we're in a house where it had a stairs, and I had like a cubby house. I set up a cubby house in the stairs, which was my office,
Right.
and I set up the investigating company, and I had a plastic typewriter, and you know, so it was like, that's how I played, was through business. And then in the early 2000s, I was really lucky to get a Churchill Fellowship, and at that time I was working with national parks, and the fellowship was looking at ways to engage and work with Indigenous people, particularly in the managing of protected areas like national parks and things like that. And then I came back from that, champing at the bit to implement all these ideas. And one of those ideas that I had was how we run community engagement meetings. And I developed this approach called the marketplace, which is about capturing the cup of conversation. And I was working a lot with Indigenous communities. And so very quickly I thought, I'm not going to get all of my ideas out there in the government space. So I did start the Evolve part-time, and that was working a lot in facilitation engagement, working with Aboriginal communities. And that's where we started. And then when Aunty Munya joined and we had those similar values, we thought we had an obsession, and that was to have 10 million more allies across Australia and a kinder and more inclusive Australia. And we thought, well, how do we do that? We don't just do that through community engagement programs. And that's when we really pivoted and focused on this, what we're doing now, and developed the 7 steps. Hey, Aunty Munya.
Yeah.
So that's where it started for me. Aunty Munya's got her own journey, of course, as well.
Yeah, well, that's what my next question was, Aunty Munya, that, you know, once you got to know Carla, and how did the practical reconciliation 7 steps actually come together?
Well, I had been running my own cultural awareness workshops and whatnot, so it just seemed like a natural blend, Carla with her community engagement expertise and me with my cultural knowledge, you know, and thinking, well, how can we combine the two and offer that to the Australian community? So that's how that interaction came about, and involvement. Yeah, pretty much.
And the way we teach is quite different. It's so with the facilitation, we were focused on catering to different diversity. So diversity in learning styles, and making sure we, appeal to the kinesthetic, auditory and visual. And so we really mix up the way that we teach, and it's very experiential and always modelling Indigenous ways of doing things, isn't it, Aunty?
Yeah, and very interactive too. But and then also about white and black working together. Like we're the model for that relationship. Like, well, look what allyship, look what we're doing. You can do this too. So, but it just looking at it makes me like, there's a picture on. I think it's a picture in the book too of when we were up at, we're on Mornington Island, I think, 10 years ago, and we ran these marketplaces with all these different ways for people to talk about the hard yarns. And a whole bunch of kids turned up because it was after school at one of the markets. And I looked at what I had. I thought we had some activities for the kids to, we were asking questions like, who's your everyday heroes? And they were drawing pictures. And then I thought, what else can we do? And I just saw in the box, we had some face paint, so I just threw them at. And she goes, have you ever face painted before? And I go, no,
we have now.
And I had a ball. I realised the talent I didn't know I had.
Is that right?
I was drawing Spider-Man faces and a whole range of other different things. And
I think you painted about 50 kids' faces.
I think so. In one go, one sitting, and they're hanging off me.
That's beautiful.
That was great. So yeah. So we all the time look for creative means to engage people and kids and get them all involved.
So I guess the relevance of that is, it's about connecting with people's creativity and what we share in common, but also how we differ and celebrating that difference as well.
Yeah, absolutely. How can people get involved with Evolve? Is, on your website, can people come and help you guys, or how do they come to your workshops? How can they get involved with Evolve?
Yeah, well, with that objective of having 10 million more allies, that's why a big part why we wrote the book. And so the book, the 7 steps, they're the 7 cultural skills or competencies that we believe everyone, people like myself, and we can talk about the other motivation for the book being the 1 in 30. We'll talk about that in a moment. But so people like myself, what is it that we need to know to be better allies and to better engage with Aboriginal people? So there's a whole bunch of ways that people can engage with us. You might have noticed, Simone, in the book, at the end of each chapter, there's suggestions for ways that the extra things you can do, actions you can take. And one of those is, like, we have an allies wall, where people go on and commit to an action for allyship. And it's incredible, the ideas that people have put on that. When we look at privilege, we have an online privilege walk. When we look at diversity, there's an online diversity quiz. And then when you're connected with us, we're coming out with ideas all the time for how you can be an ally, and through videos and through posts. But in terms of our workshops, we're about to launch a monthly sort of public workshop.
Okay.
Organisations do our workshops. We do them, they're highly experiential, whether they're via a yarning circle, whether we're in the same room or we're over Zoom, doesn't matter. And the exciting thing that we've launched this week is our ally accreditation program. Do you want to share more about that, Aunty Munya?
Well, so previously we worked with people in organisations, and we got individuals saying, geez, I'd like to do that as well. And so we've come up with an allyship program that individuals can participate in. And it was launched
last week, actually. We launched it.
We just launched it last week. It's an 8-week course. So people watch the videos, and then there's a set of questions for them to complete, so that you're an accredited ally. It shows you've reflected on what you've learned, and you can apply it in the questions that we've set.
And there's a live Q&A as well with us. But Aunty Munya and I are assessing all the responses. There's quite a bit. There's over 50 sort of reflection questions, and then there's an assessment that people do, a project, and they come up with and record their own acknowledgement of country. So I think it's the first of its kind in terms of getting feedback on those skills and the application of those skills.
And then we give them an award. It's a digital award, isn't it? Accreditation
badge
that they can put on their website.
That sounds very cool. I love the idea of that. That's definitely the next step on your book, to really consolidate what you've written in there. Just even looking at you guys together, you look gorgeous, and obviously there's great love.
That must have been because I changed from my pajama top. I realised it was on Zoom.
No, but you can see that there's a lot of love between the two of you, and obviously comradeship, that you've managed to come together to give instructions for all people across the country to make our relationships better. And again, I've thanked you before, but thank you, because it is so overdue and so timely. And given the situation too with COVID now, and that we've all been locked up together, I guess it's brought on a little bit of humility to realise that, we are all fallible, globally. And we really need to band together to conquer other things like COVID or whatever, rather than have these bickerings between each other, and to really acknowledge one another. And that's what you guys fundamentally have done in this book. That's been so impressive for me, that you've really been, from my eyes as a white woman, thinking you've really let me see into Indigenous culture, of things that I haven't been taught before, of things that I didn't even know about, that really make sense.
Yeah. Well, you said earlier about people wanting to know more, and that's what we found. There's a real thirst. People want to know more.
Yeah. And they want to help, but don't know how. We're very practically oriented, the two of us. And it's like, well, here's some practical ways you can go about doing that.
And people, we're focused on confidence. So anything you do with us is a journey of self-reflection, and we always have the so what factor. So in anything that we explore, it's like, well, what does this, there's an opportunity for you to self-reflect on what this means to you and how you can apply it in your own life. And just going back, so we find there's a real desire, and people are hungry to know, but a lot of people are quite frightened of doing or saying the wrong thing.
Yeah, so for sure.
We're focused on those potential tripwires. And my own story, you know, I've learned a lot from my mistakes, and it's quite embarrassing. Sometimes I share some of my own story of the mistakes that I've made and where I've not thought, you know, I remember earlier in my career, I started my career as a town planner, and I was doing this big plan, and someone I was working with said, oh, who've you engaged from the Aboriginal community? This was back in the early 90s. And I'm like, oh, no, the Aboriginal community is not very active here.
Assuming.
You might want to rethink that. And so I share that story for two things. One is that, you know, that's reconciliation is a journey for all of us, and it doesn't matter where you start. So look at me now, you know, the privilege of co-owning and leading a majority-owned Indigenous business, where I started from. And, also that allyship is about acknowledging and learning from your mistakes.
Yes.
And it is about your impact. It's really different, allyship. It's not about your intent. You know, when we say, oh, as long as you've got a good intent. In the case of allyship, it's like, no, it's actually about your impact. And stolen generations is a great example of, for some people, they may have thought they had a good intent, but the horrendous impact. And I also just want to mention, Simone, the 1 in 30, which we talk about a lot. So only 3% of our population is Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander in Australia. So 97% are like you, Simone, and I, not Indigenous. So just if people put themselves back into a room of 30 people, only one of those people statistically is going to be the Aunty Munya. And so when we're interviewed about our book, Simone, at first people kept coming and saying, I want to talk to Aunty Munya. And we're like, no, that's missing the point. And it's not about my ego. It's like, we can't keep going to the Aunty Munyas of the world and saying, teach us, teach us, teach us. I say to journalists is that if it came to Aunty Munya's Dreamtime book or anything like that, absolutely talk to Aunty Munya. I can't speak about Aboriginal culture, but I can talk about my journey and what I need to know and learn to be an effective ally.
That's remarkable. And I guess I really liked what you said, Carla, about making mistakes so you can learn from your mistakes by asking these questions, because obviously we need to get to know each other on a more intimate level, you know, to be able to move forward, I guess. And intimate, I mean, to really respect one another and where we come from, and why in particular the Indigenous are the way they are, and why we've perceived the way they are, but actually really ask questions. And you guys have done this in your book. You've really pointed out the differences and how we can bring those differences together to move forward. And the self-reflection at the end of each chapter is, it was confronting for me as well, because I had to really think, you know, where am I really situated on this particular thing? And I look deep into myself, and that's another really good thing for practical reconciliation, that it gives you really good time and advice to really reflect on, you know, where you've stood or where I've stood and what I've believed up till now, and how can I be a better person and more understanding person. Your book is amazing.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. We've been really taken aback by the popularity of it. In the book, you might remember there's a simple 3-step conversation method. Did you want to talk about that?
The R3 culture that we call the R3 culture is for you to apply in any interactive situation with people, particularly where there's potential conflict. There's 3 processes. One is to stop and reflect on what is the issue at hand, relate, how might I feel in that other person's shoes, and then reconcile how can we work together to move forward. So we call it the R3 culture, and we can apply it to almost any scenario. And people have just taken to it like a duck to water. There's something that they really love about its simplicity.
A great example is when people ask us, they're in one of our programs, and they're already an ally or becoming an ally, And they say, what, Carla, Aunty Munya, I've heard someone say a racist remark or a stereotype, like one that you often hear is, why can't Aboriginal people just get over it in terms of the history and move on? And so, people are really wanting to do the right thing. So in terms of applying the 3 R's, firstly, you reflect. So what's the issue here? So if you're in conversation with someone that said something like that, the issue here is that they've got a perspective that might differ from your own. Relate, put yourself in that other person's shoes. Now, this is actually a real example, isn't it? But Aunty Munya and I were at an author's seminar, and it was a lady that we'd been talking to for quite a bit, and she was very genuine and curious. So we were at a dinner table, and she said this to me, why can't Aboriginal people get over it and move on? So in terms of relating and putting myself in her shoes, I thought, you know what? This is a good person. This question doesn't come from a place of mean-spiritedness or anything like that. It's just not knowing. And we invited her to ask us. Obviously, we'd created a safe environment for her to ask something like this. So I thought, put myself in her shoes. That was pretty courageous, her asking something like that she really wanted to know. Now, in terms of reconciling and sort of the emphasis is on working out a way forward with that other person. So it's important in doing that not to make any assumptions about the other person or where they're coming from. So in that kind of case, when a potentially racist remark has been made, we always say make sure the space is safe. But in terms of another person learning, what I always do is I offer to share my experience. And then if they don't want to hear it, I don't share it. In that case, I said, that's a really good question. Let's call her, I forget what, let's call her Mary.
Yeah.
That's a really good question, Mary. I've got a story or an experience that might help your perspective on that, or might, shows why I've got the perspective I've got. Would you like to hear it? And if she says no, then, I'll leave it. Yeah. So then I went ahead and shared the story. And in this case, it was a true story. It just happened the week before, and it was like Jenny and I, Jenny's Aboriginal and she's a facilitator for us, and we were in Melbourne last week and we were running a program, and she was super tired. We'd just flown in from Sydney and she was so tired, and on the taxi on the way in, I said to her, look, why are you so tired? And she said, I was up till 1 o'clock in the morning ironing the kids' uniforms and making sure everything was right for them to go to school that day. And I'm like, I just didn't know, I wasn't thinking. And I'm just like, you iron uniforms? Like, and I gave her a hard time about it. And, because at that time my daughter was going to school and they'd wear uniforms. And I'm like, God, I send her off in anything. And, and then she said, oh, well, we got talking a bit more. And what I found out was, and then I sort of felt a little bit bad afterwards, but it was like, no, this is all about, learning. What I found out was that she was actually from the stolen generation, at the very tail end of it, and she has 2 children, and she's absolutely petrified of her children being stolen. And she even actually worked for the Department of Communities that were in that. So she even worked in a senior position in that space, but she was still petrified of her children being stolen. So she says she makes sure everything is immaculate. Their clothes are ironed, they've got a full lunch, because those stereotypes of Aboriginal kids not coming with food and all that, and they're clean. And I just thought, wow, that's what I thought, that the fact that I didn't iron my clothes was actually a privilege. And that's one of the steps, Simone, is we explore privilege and what that means. So in telling this story, I said to Mary, I said, look, Mary, so you can see from that there's nothing to move on from, because it's happening now. And in that sense, we often, when we look at history, which is step 3, we look at the impact of history. Yeah. And it's a bit of a misnomer, that word history, because history has been said to come from her story. Yeah. So it's stories that are happening now.
Yeah, that story gives really deep insight. I think the one about Jenny, that also meant a lot to me. Like all of your chapters, all of the 7 steps really do give very deep insight as to both sides of the conversation. I think this should be in schools. I think it needs to be in primary schools, and it probably should be taught a lot more than what is being taught, in the history of Australia, because the history of white Australia is obviously very small in comparison to the Indigenous people that have been living here for, forever. And yeah, this really gives a perspective from both angles as to how we can become allies and understand each other better.
Well, the exciting thing is that we're just at the moment writing the younger readers' version of the book. And it's
very exciting.
It's a story about Benji and Kaya, and they step on these magical stones. There's 7 stones.
Right.
To get across the creek, and each of those activates sort of a story when they step on the stone, and then they get across the other side to a special surprise, which is Granny Munya at the Wudu fires, the teaching fires where they can ask questions.
Oh, that sounds amazing.
There is actually, is it Ivanhoe Grammar School in Victoria rolling it out in the curriculum for high school students as well.
Wonderful news. You guys are incredibly creative. I could hear that in Practical Reconciliation, the creativeness, and just even hearing this now it sounds wonderful. I can't wait to hear that. So you guys, obviously, you've worked very hard on putting this all together, and then you've decided to do your audio book with me. Thank you for coming on board. And it's definitely been my privilege to listen to this particular audio book, and you guys both narrating it. How did you find narrating the book? And did the book sound any different, once you were narrating it?
Much easier than what we put off, and it was lovely to find you and for you to make that process so easy and natural, because we put it off for a long time.
Yeah, so after we did it, we thought, what were we worried about? It was an easy process to go through, wasn't it?
And because we kind of wrote, we led took chapters to lead the writing of each chapter, so they're the ones that I would narrate one chapter and Aunty Munya the next, and we actually enjoyed it, didn't we?
Yeah.
I think we were shocked that we enjoyed it. Of course, you pick up a couple of editorials in the book, and you think, oh, okay, that's for the next version. We can fix that. We can fix that. But it was great. And so, to the extent that Aunty Munya's booked in next week to
do Journey into Dreamtime.
Oh, how exciting! I can't wait to hear that as well. I'm looking forward to it. Did you enjoy narrating it as well, Aunty Munya?
Yeah, I did once I got into it, because I was reluctant at first because I don't particularly like the sound of my voice. I think like a lot of people. And
absolutely.
It sounded normal, So I was did it after a few times. I thought, this is good. I can do this. So,
and it's so, because people, Aunty Munya is a superstar, and people love her voice and love her. So it was so good we did it. And just before we did it, I had listened to Uncle Archie Roach's autobiography, and that was so special in his voice, and it was it's like he had him right next to you, and that was real motivation for us self-narrating as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think the one thing, like you said, with Archie Roach and any author narrator, is that is going to be there for generations, that audio, you know what I mean? So 2, 3, 4, 5 generations down the line, these people will be listening to these amazing women who wrote this particular story, and it'll mean a lot for generations to come that you can actually hear it in your voices. So congratulations for, taking that step and doing it. I'm glad to hear that it wasn't so difficult in the end. And you probably both thought at the end of that, we could probably get used to this, yeah?
Yeah, we did, definitely. And Aunty Munya's just finished a manuscript, which is going to be published by Mugabala Books on Aboriginal languages, so that one will be coming as well.
Fantastic. Well, I wish you all of the best of success with this, and I think it's not just your success, it's going to be the success of Australians moving forward as allies together once this gets out into the general public. And the audiobook hopefully is going to be available very, very soon, within the next 2 to 4 weeks. So thank you so much for coming on board, recording with me and having this chat today. Is there anything else that you'd like to say to the listener? Obviously, contact details where that people can get involved with Evolve Communities and contact you guys as well. But if you've got anything else, let me know. I'd love to hear and chat more.
Well, we just want to say big SO, and they're That's in Torres Strait Islander language. And the reason why we use Big SO is in the book, just to think about intrigue. And when you talked about covert and that in the book also, now Aunty Munya, we teach about kinship and belonging, and that everyone is family. Country is family, and so just, you know, anyone that connects with us is part of the kinship, that kinship network, and we keep talking to you. If you go to our website, there's lots of free resources as well. But big SO to you, Simone, for your allyship.
Thank you, and big SO to you guys for creating this environment. Wonderful, and I love being a part of this. Thank you. So where's your website?
It's evolve with an S on the end, so evolves.com.au.
Excellent.
Or they could just type in Evolve Communities into Google and it'll take you there as well.
Yeah, or type in Aunty Munya or my name and it'll come up.
Awesome. All right. Well, wonderful speaking with you again. And I look forward to having a chat again after we record your next couple of audio books and we can discuss this even more.
Great.
Lovely.
Keep on the good road, ladies. You're doing wonderful work.
Yeah,
thank you,
and
Simone.
in closing we say, Nidagul Gona.
Go well.
Go well.
Nidagul Gona.
Bye-bye.
Cheers.
Thanks for joining me.
Thank you.
And my guests from around the world.
Thank you for being a part of this show.
The Simone Feiler podcast. Catch you next time.
It's a wrap.